It is now my privilege to introduce Reverend Gloria White-Hammond, who will present our commencement address.
Thank you. Now, let me advise you that today your commencement speaker is a Black preacher. And in the Black preaching tradition, we all talk. The preacher preaches, but the congregation talks back. So let's have some church up in UMass this afternoon. Good afternoon. I certainly do want to begin by giving a shout out to the matchless, the marvelous class of 2008 of the magnificent University of Massachusetts in Boston. Congratulations to each one of you. And I certainly want to express my appreciation to your families and your friends who have endured so much for you and with you over these years. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to stand before you today. I'm humbled and deeply honored to share the podium with such distinguished honorary degree recipients as Dr. Sarah Moten, Ron Logue, and Dan Ray. I am encouraged by each one of their accomplishments and inspired by their wisdom. And I'm also delighted to be here with such illustrious guests, with many friends who are on the board of trustees and among the faculty and staff. Very grateful to President Wilson, and especially my dear friend, your esteemed and beloved chancellor. Ain't nobody else in the world like Keith Modley, the chancellor. Be the man. And I'm also very, very pleased this afternoon to be here with my best friend, with my boo, with my husband, the Reverend Dr. Ray Hammond, who himself received an honorary degree from UMass in 1999. So the tall, dark, handsome stranger sitting next to Angela Motley is my husband. After 34 years, 11 months, 13 days, and 22 hours, he still makes me weak in the knees. And so, as you prepare to go out in the world and to make a difference in this highly challenged world that desperately needs your skills and talents, I'd like to ask you this morning, this afternoon, to reflect with me on a theme that has fueled honored heroes and sheroes who have come up against great obstacles but have determined to make critical differences. And that quite simply is, just do it. Now, I'm going to ask you to turn to, every now and then in a Black church, right, we ask the congregation to turn to their neighbor and repeat whatever the preacher says. So all of y'all who know Black church, you got to help out the other folks. So turn to your neighbor and just say, just do it. Just do it. All right. Introduced in 1988, this logo has been extremely successful for Nike. Not because we necessarily pressed forward with any fitness programs, but because we did go out and buy the athletic gear. And that made Nike very happy because in the end, they were really much more invested in their bottom line than they were in your bottom. And so this logo, I believe, is lifted from the Handbook of Motherhood. And it's comprised of all of those sayings that you promised that you would never say when you grew up and had children of your own. And my personal favorite is, honey, I brought you into this world, and I can sure enough take you. So just do it. It's a short version of one of those mama statements. And if you work with kids in any capacity, you can testify that every now and then, children will make you go there. And it seems that having asked them once, twice, and 3 times, that the bright, gifted, articulate hopes for the world's tomorrow suddenly morph into the dumb, dull, and ignorant nightmares of your today. And their uncooperative attitudes begin to mount up on wings like eagles and soar in a path that lead to your very last nerve. And before you realize what happens, you hear your mother's words blaring from your mouth: no ifs, no ands, no buts, just. And I want to suggest today that as you prepare to leave the security of UMass Boston, to make your way into the world, that you take this not simply as mama's mandate, but as your personal mantra. Just do it. In your time at UMass Boston, you've worked hard and you have worked well, and that's why you're here today. You've gained knowledge and a set of practical skills that will enable you to make your way in this world. And the world desperately needs those skills. Ours is a world characterized by economic uncertainty and social inequities and racial disparities. And that's the bad news. But here's the good news. You are well equipped to make a difference. Armed with this degree and fully loaded with determination, you have the power to move the needle from bad to good, from worse to mo better. You can just do it. But there's another reality. Tell your neighbor, but. What? Tell your neighbor, but. What? The other reality is it will not be easy. Typically, substantive change that will stand the test of time is not an event. It's a process. As in 3 steps forward and 2 steps back and another step forward and so on. And sometimes the roads will be rough and the going will seem tough and the hills will feel far too hard to climb. But what I've learned for sure in life is that staying on track for victory requires that you come to terms with at least 4 different entities that will accompany you and even seem to stalk you all the days of your life. And they are faith and fear and failure and frustration. What I've learned over the course of my life is that if you stay on speaking terms with these 4 entities, you will discover that they are not simply there to confound you, but to help you grow and develop and empower you to be the change and make the change that you and your family and this community and our nation and our entire world so desperately need. You can just. Regarding the role of faith in affecting change, I ask that you would consider the life of one Nelson Mandela as Exhibit A. This Nobel Peace Prize winner was raised in a small village in South Africa and trained as a lawyer. He labored for decades to bring down the brutal racist system known as apartheid. Taking on one challenge at a time, he fought the system and ignited a movement which landed him in a prison cell in Robben Island. Now, like so many people here today, I too supported divestment from South Africa. I boycotted golf and I didn't even have a car. But quite honestly, if you pressed me, I did not think that I could live to see the day when there would be a free Nelson Mandela in a liberated South Africa, because apartheid was so entrenched and seemed so intractable. But Nelson Mandela said that for every day he spent in that prison cell in Robben Island, it never occurred to him that the freedom fighters would not prevail. He knew his cause was just. And after 27 years, Mr. Mandela got out of jail, and he was not bitter, and he was not crazy, and was duly elected to become the 11th president of South Africa, and the walls of apartheid came tumbling down. World changers need to have that kind of faith. That's a faith that will thwart injustice and fuel a movement. And of course, you need to see the world for what it really is, to face the problems without blinders. But don't be immobilized by the task at hand. You have to be grounded in reality, but not mired in reality. Too often, after seeing the daunting obstacles and the steep mountains on the road ahead, we want to nestle into a fetal position or just steal away and stay away. You can get weary and frustrated, but history shows us that perseverance and long-term vision are essential ingredients to making a difference. The race is often not won by the swift, but by those who hang in and hold on and are not defeated by short-term setbacks. That's the kind of faith that will pierce the darkness, that will speak promise to pain and hope to hopelessness. That's the kind of faith you need to develop to be a world changer. Just do it. And then there is the matter of fear. For the past 7 years, I have devoted my life to advocating on behalf of the great people of Sudan. And you certainly have, no doubt, heard about the crisis in Darfur and Western Sudan, what our administration in the United States has labeled a genocide. Perhaps as many as 400,000 have died in that conflict and 2.5 million people displaced in a brutal war that pits the Arab Muslim government in Khartoum against non-Arab Muslims. However, it's important to understand that this kind of genocidal brutality is not new to Sudan. Before the genocide in Darfur and Western Sudan, there were the genocides, what could be arguably genocides, in southern Sudan and the Nuba Mountains, all of which were facilitated by the current regime. Since 2001, I have made now more than 10 trips into southern Sudan to document the terror. I've encountered thousands of women and children who were captured during the war in South Sudan and taken to the north, where they were sold into slavery. Subsequently, they were returned to their villages through a very elaborate but controversial underground railroad, through which their freedom was purchased for a going rate of $33 per slave, for about the cost of a standing room ticket at the Fenway Park, or a 3-hour parking space in a downtown garage. You too could purchase the freedom of a woman. The returnees convey tales of abject horror. There was the young mother who, when captured, begged to carry her 2 toddlers rather than carrying the loot from the village. The raiders shot and killed her babies. Problem solved, they taunted. In my earliest days of traveling to Sudan, I will say that it was a fear-filled experience. Not because of the fear from the external dangers associated with traveling into a war zone where we needed to guard our flight plans in order to keep from being intercepted, or where the first thing you did when you got off the plane was to look for foxholes. Not because of those external fears, but because of the fears that loomed within me. There was, first of all, the fear of controversy. I'm an individual who does not sit well in the midst of controversy. I have lived my life inside the box. I follow the rules. I color inside the lines. I have always been a good girl. And so the notion of taking on a task that was controversial was one that quite honestly left me feeling fearful. But even greater was a fear of a sense of inadequacy. It was a sense that perhaps I was not up to the task. I came face to face with that sense of fear during my second trip into Sudan, when I really wanted to understand whether this was a cause that I should invest in. My second day on my second trip, it was a terrible, horrible no good, very bad day. In the afternoon, we encountered a group of returning slaves. And as I spied that group of several hundred, there was one young man in particular whose face was extremely grotesque. You've heard I'm a pediatrician. I've certainly seen deformities. I made the assumption that it was a deformity with which he was born. And when I went to speak to him and to his mom, they reassured me, no, that was not the way he was born. This young man was 11 years old at the time. While he was enslaved, he had a job that most young men do have, and that was to tend to the cattle and the goats. This young boy, 4 years earlier, had lost a cow. His master was so angry with him that he took an axe and chopped the boy's nose off. And so the image that I was seeing was the face of genocide up close and personal. I will tell you that night I had difficulty getting to sleep. I tossed and I turned and wondered whether there was anything that I could really say or do to have an impact on the lives of these individuals I met or to change the situation. I finally drifted off to sleep when I was aroused by the sound of gunshots. And as I sat up in my bed or in my sleeping bag in that tent in the midst of the sand, I found myself just crying, saying, God, I can't do this. I don't have the stuff that it takes to do Sudan. And there I was, very much caught up in the midst of my inadequacy with no props to lean on. It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. And then God began to minister to me, to serve me, to speak to me in the midst of my inadequacy, and said that I was exactly in the place that I needed to be. And so often as you go out to change the world, you will find yourself in a place that will not feel like a good place. You will come to discover that it's a God place. That I was standing in the same place that Harriet Tubman had to stand, and Sojourner Truth, and Rosa Parks, and Martin King, and Nelson Mandela. So often when we think of great sheroes and heroes, we focus on the greatness of their deeds and assume that they always march forward with steely determination and never wondered and never wavered. Not so. I've come to understand that at some point you hit a wall and you've got to make a choice between succumbing to the fear or moving forward in faith. At some point, you just gotta choose. And so when I retired from my practice 5 months ago, it was so that I could support the choice that I made. I was particularly encouraged by an old woman who I met who was a returning slave whose chest was scarred from multiple stabbings after she attempted to resist being raped. And I said to her, you know, people back in America aren't sure that this is a good thing to do. Her words of gratitude remain an inspiration to me as an African-American descendant of slaves. She said, tell the American people I said, thank you for helping to free me. I have suffered in the North. And as she looked around that dry climate in the midst of the dry season, she said, and surely I will suffer here in the South. And then she took her long, thin, dark chocolate fingers and she cupped the dirt. And she said, thank you for returning me to the place where the soil is the color of my own skin. At least here I will suffer with my own people. And so the challenge to you and to all of us At some point, you have to survey the social and moral landscape of your neighborhood, of your community, of this nation, of the world, and decide whether you're going to throw up your hands and leave well enough alone or become an agent for justice. I refuse to tiptoe strategically through life, avoiding all the obstacles, only to arrive safely at my grave. That makes no sense to me. And so, if you're going to be a world changer, sometimes you will be scared. And you will have to go forward anyhow with your knees knocking and your heart racing and your forehead sweating. You will just have to do it. You will just have to do it. And so in a few weeks, when I return to Sudan for my 10th, 11th, 12th time, I will return to visit the school that our group, My Sister's Keeper, is building. We are now in our 4th month of construction of the Kunyuk School for Girls in a very small village in southern Sudan. We began the school 5 years ago with 100 girls. There are now over 1,000 girls enrolled, and we are building a permanent campus for those girls to be educated. Tell your neighbor, just do it. And then you also have to confront the issue of failure. I kind of regret that our notion of a good resume only touts our successes, because we would learn so much more if the resumes also revealed the times when we fell flat on our faces and how we managed to pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off and start all over again. Several years ago, 13-year-old Natalie Gilbert won a contest to sing the national anthem before a nationally televised Western Conference basketball playoff game. As the large crowd packed Portland's Rose Auditorium and waited in anticipation, young Natalie took her place alone at midcourt so that she could sing the celebrated Star-Spangled Banner, just like this sister sang earlier. She entered and she was confident with her head held high. She had competed, she had won, she was getting ready to sing the song. And so she began, initially quite confident, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light." But then as she got to the second line, it was clear that she was starting to stumble and stammer. She had forgotten the words to the song. What so proudly we held. She tried again and then got stumped again. The whole auditorium held their breath as the seconds ticked by. It was young Natalie's worst nightmare. The tears welled up in her eyes. She closed them and shook her head, opened them once again as she desperately scanned the audience looking for her dad. And suddenly she saw the Trailblazer coach, Mo Cheeks, approaching. Purposefully yet gently, the towering coach put his large arm around her small shoulder and began to sing along with her. And with a warm smile, he encouraged the entire crowd to sing along as well, until all together, young Natalie, Coach Mo, and the entire auditorium finished to thunderous applause o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. As you go through life, There will be times when you will lose your way. There will be times when you will forget your song. What you can be sure of is that all of us who gather here today are not going anywhere. Not if, but when you forget the words. We are yet remaining by your side. We're just a heartbeat away. You can call on us because that's what friends and family are for. Just do it. And finally, there's the issue of frustration. A few years ago came to the end of what had been a rather frustrating day. I spent the morning unsuccessfully searching for alternate housing for one of my asthmatic who was hospitalized at Children's Hospital in the ICU once again. And one of the reasons his asthma is so bad is because he lives in a third-floor walk-up that's both rat and roach infested. And I tried again to contact his landlord to see what he could do about providing them with alternate quarters. And that afternoon, I began trying to access social services for a family of a little girl who I discovered had been sexually abused. But all of my referral sources told me to take a number. It would be a while. And so by the time I got to my last client, I was quite ready for Scotty to beam me up. When Maria was a 12-year-old girl who had recently immigrated from Guatemala. I've learned over the years, in order to get a sense of how well kids are adjusting to the culture, to quite simply speak English to them. And I kept asking Maria questions, but she was not answering. Her mother assured me that she was just muy tímida, very shy. And so I dismissed Maria to get undressed and be ready for our exam. And her mother and I continued to talk. Her mother said that she was a pastora. And I said, well, I'm a minister as well. Her mother seemed intrigued. You're both a doctor and a minister, yes. And you're married, yes. You have children, yes. And then she started to go on about what an amazing thing it was to do all of those things. But I, on the other hand, was feeling very discouraged. And so I began whining about how difficult it is to get people to help you these days, to help other people. When all of a sudden the curtain flew back, and there was Maria, and now she is fully decked in her blue paper gown. But what was so remarkable is that she had her hand on her hip and her other finger pointing at me. She looked directly in my eye and said in letter-perfect English, "You go, girl." And so I think that that is real wisdom for men and women who are graduates of the class of 2008 for University of Massachusetts, that no matter what you have to face, through the triumphs and through the tragedies, you just go. Through victories and defeats, you go. When people catch the vision and when they don't even have a clue, you go. You just do it. Now turn to your neighbor and repeat after me. Turn to your neighbor and say, clip the ifs, can the ands, kick the butts, and just do it. God bless you.